Hello, today's video is likely to be the first of a series, a periodic series, not a consecutive one, of videos in which I'm going to go over some of the basic fundamental principles of language learning. These are philosophical and pedagogical concepts, things that we might not normally have in our minds, but if we can bring them some degree of metacognitive consideration and bring them to the forefront of our consciousness, then we can be more intentional about what we're doing when we teach ourselves languages, and therefore more efficient and more effective. So the thing that I want to talk about today, I'm calling the principle of exaggeration in language learning. That is when you are challenged to do something, to achieve something, and so you deliberately go beyond it in practice with the intention of pulling back and therefore attaining it when you actually use the language. So I'll give some more concrete examples of this in regards to simply speaking in the first place, articulating, when it comes to pronunciation, correcting pronunciation errors, and when it comes to, more than anything else, reading literature dramatically with feeling and understanding. So I will put timestamps for all of these things in the video because somebody may want to go ahead to those in the future. I'm very happy to see that videos that I made some 15 years ago are still being seen today, and so I hope that what I have to say is providing a lasting value and resource to people. So again, I will put timestamps for those various aspects, but I would like to begin this video today with a preface that really is only valid in the time that I'm making this video in early 2022, in February, March of 2022. If you're watching this when I first put it out, please do listen to this, because in this preface, I am going to, basically, I'm asking for your assistance. I need your help. Particularly if you like my videos, if you want me to keep making them on a regular basis, those of you who've watched them in the past know that over the past 15 years, I haven't been consistent. I tend to stop and disappear for a couple of years, and that's often because I've moved to a new university, a new institution, and when I go somewhere, I get a new set of administrative responsibilities. I'm usually given a teaching load that includes a lot of classes that aren't really in my area, so I need to prepare and work for them. And so I am going to have to either go to a new institution sometime very soon, or ideally, what I'm trying to do, I've spoken of this in past videos, is I'm aspiring to open my own virtual academy. And I can see that this is a place where I can really teach only the kind of classes that I do best to the kind of people that really want them from all around the world. Reading and discussion courses in literature, some support for self-teachers of languages, great books courses. I've mentioned this in the past, and so what I'm asking you for today is your assistance in spreading the word about the Academy. In the description of today's video, I have a link to a Google form where people can express interest and in various types of courses and get much more information. So I am asking you to please have a look at that, and if it fits you, then wonderful, but I think that the offerings initially are relatively limited, and it will probably not be the right language, the right level, the right price, the right time for you. If it doesn't fit you, though, what I'm asking, more than I'm asking you to consider signing up yourself, is spread the word about this. Maybe you'll read this and you think, well, it's not for me, but yeah, my Uncle Bob could use this, or my friend Sally was talking about that, or certainly you have all of you wide connections with social media where you could spread information about this virtual academy. If I can get this to succeed, then I can really help people there directly in the way that I think I can do best. And also I can continue in forms like this here on YouTube, making regular videos and sharing information in this fashion. So please help. Look at the form, and please spread it as widely as you possibly can. I appreciate your assistance in this very, very much. So, on to today's topic is, as I said, the principle of exaggeration. And I can think of this, to illustrate this, with something like archery. Let's say you're shooting for a target, and you're aiming for it, but you keep falling short. Well, one thing you might be able to do is you might be able to pull back much further, aim high deliberately, and then hit the target in the middle. And that's sort of the idea that I'm talking about today with exaggeration in language learning. There are things that you have a hard time doing or attaining that if you practice them by exaggerating, by going overboard, by being overshooting. When you practice, then you can pull back and you can attain them, then you can do them. I find this kind of interesting because usually when I think about principles of language learning and other things, they apply quite broadly to all other kinds of learning. But this is not something that you could do, say, if you're playing a musical instrument or exercising. You probably just aren't able to go beyond what you can do. You might hurt yourself if you did. But with language learning, this is very much the case. So as I said, I want to apply this first and foremost to simply speaking, simply articulating, because this is something that people, even though they say they want to learn to speak a language, have a hard time doing. I've thought about this because in my previous video, where I introduced the concept of polysthenics, moving around while you practice a language, I also showed that by the technique of reading aloud in a loud, clear voice. And thinking over that again, I really do believe that the great majority of people are quite challenged to do this. I would say that it's as high as 80 or 90% of people just can't read aloud in a loud, clear voice, because it's not that they're physically incapable of it, but psychologically they have all sorts of inhibitions and fears that might have some rational ground, but if you don't try to resolve them, then they become rationalizations to avoid doing something that pretty much any preface to a book about how to learn language all stress that you need to read aloud in a nice, clear voice. And like I said, my experience as a classroom teacher and as a tutor for helping people teach themselves is that 90% of people really have a hard time with this. So probably you have a hard time with this. What do people do? What do I mean by a loud, clear voice? Well, I'm using one right now. This is not my normal everyday speaking voice. This is my professorial lecture delivery voice. I'm deliberately speaking and projecting my voice, articulating more than I normally do, and speaking more slowly. So it's hard for me to revert to my normal voice when I'm doing something like making a video, but let me try to look away. And if I do, and I imagine instead of this, I'm just talking to some friends of mine on the phone, I'm going to speak much faster. I'm going to slur. I'm going to do things like this. So it's a different way of talking. Now, what people tend to do instead of speaking in a loud, clear voice is they mumble. And they speak softly because they say, well, I'm scared that I am going to bother somebody. I'm studying in the library, or I live in a studio apartment and my wife is asleep in the bed over there. This is valid, but then you should find another place to study. People say, well, I'm afraid I'm going to sound crazy. I don't know how to answer that one. If you think it's crazy to practice languages, you can blame it on me. You can tell people you're told to speak out loud because I said them, you can send them my way and blame it on me, or maybe get a new set of friends because there's nothing crazy about learning how to speak another language. You might say, a lot of people say, well, I'm somehow, I don't want to sound silly or dumb, or I know I sound funny. Well, you got to get over that. When you speak a foreign language, you are going to sound silly or funny at first, and you have to get used to that and overcome that and develop that so you don't anymore. The most cogent reason that people have sometimes for not speaking aloud is that, well, I know that there are hard sounds to make in that language. I don't know how to make them, so I don't want to get into the habit of doing them wrong. And again, here, this is just something, well, you don't want to make mountains out of molehills. There might be difficult sounds, but if you practice in an appropriate way, you might not have difficulties with them. You won't know unless you try. And if you do try, then you do have problems, then you can correct them. There's no reason to think that you're going to give yourself permanently impaired pronunciation by trying to speak aloud. So these are all rationalizations that people use to avoid speaking in a loud, clear voice, picking up and projecting nicely, which is what you need to do to learn. But I think it starts when people, instead of talking in a loud, clear voice, they will insist on staying sitting down, and they've usually got a book and they're kind of hunched over, and so they tend to read in a mumbling fashion by being hunched over. So how can we correct this? How can we do some exercise to make this better? Well, we're not going to do calisthenics, but at least we can stand up. And if we stand up, then it's easier to be a bit straight. And if we want to have correct pronunciation, we want to normally be talking in a comfortably straight up position. But using the principle of exaggeration, let's put ourselves in attention. Let's make ourselves really stiff and get as high and tight as we can back here. And then, as I said, a nice, loud, clear voice is already what I'm using. So let's go beyond this. Let's put ourselves in a position where we're at attention and we're speaking in an extra loud and clear voice. Let's do that 3 times. Exaggerating, extra loud and clear. Exaggerating, extra loud and clear. Exaggerating, extra loud and clear. Well, once you practice like this, then you can relax and go back, hopefully, into this straighter position. And if you're already used to projecting so loudly, then your voice will now be projecting in the right loud and clear position. If you just set your target to speak, as I'm doing right now, you normally speak like this, and you set your target to speak like this, you might end up somewhere in the middle. But if you practice like this, then maybe you'll end up straight in the right position. So that's how you can apply this to the basic overcoming the inhibitions and the fears of speaking aloud in a nice clear voice when you speak a foreign language. The next way that we can apply the principle of exaggeration is to correcting the kind of thing that people just mentioned, the cogent reason that people might have for not wanting to speak a foreign language is pronunciation. So when you learn a foreign language, you are going to encounter some sounds that are probably going to be difficult for you and sounds that you're going to want to correct. And so the principle of exaggeration is a great way to do that, because when you have problems with making sounds, your speech organs are not used to going into those positions. And so you need to train them to go beyond there, and then they can also retract. So as an example, let me give a sound that is in English, is pretty distinctive and different. Other languages might have a variant of it or don't, or might not have it at all. And so this is something that's visible. So English speakers can see it and conceptualize this easily. And this should also help speakers of other languages, because they probably don't have this and you might have a problem with this. And this is the sound that when you want to correct your pronunciation, it behooves you to learn some phonetics. This is a sound that we can describe as a voiced labiodental fricative. Voiced means you feel it rumbling in your throat when you speak it. Labio is your lips. Dental means so you're going to touch our teeth to our lips. Fricative is the sound that comes out here. So it's the voiced labiodental fricative. That is the V sound. Va, va, va in English. If you try to say a lot of words with a V, particularly if you look in a mirror, let's try some V words. Let's try some names. Vincent, Victor, Valerie, Vanessa. Some other kinds of vampires, vomit, vase, violent, violet. You think about all these things. We're actually, to make this sound, you bite your lip. You need to put your teeth out and come out and bite the bottom of your lip. Va, 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 va. Most other languages that I can think of don't really do this. Russian kind of does. Вы, выжу, выдохе. You kind of put your teeth in the same position, but you've got a different thing going on in your mouth. You've got this sort of sucking, rumbling going on in your mouth that we don't have in English. German and French, German is was willst du? Okay, so we're touching our teeth, but it's to the inside of the lip, not the bottom. Que voulez-vous? Same thing in French. We're biting, but not nearly so far forward. In Latin, vos, vobiscum. We're sort of sucking. It's not the same sound at all. How about Spanish? We have we write V, vosotros, van, vámonos. But it's a bilabial sound. We're touching our two lips together. Let's try to make a V sound in Korean. Or how about Arabic? Sound doesn't exist. You don't make these sound at all. So if you're coming from one of these backgrounds, if you're coming from a background of another language and you're trying to make a V sound in English, you're probably going to do either you're used to doing something different or not putting your teeth out over here. You're going to come and you're going to say, hey, I have been articulating my thoughts on this planet for 20, 30, 40 years without biting my lip. And now you're telling me I have to bite my lip quickly as I articulate all sorts of thoughts. It's probably just not going to happen. So once you know what you need to do to get the correct V sound, come over here and go V, you can say, well, if I try to aim for that, if I try to practice that, and I'm not used to doing it, inevitably I'm going to retract back to biting the inside of my lip or doing something else. But using the principle of exaggeration, you can go in front of a mirror and you can practice saying some of these V words and making some silly sentences. Victor violated his vote. The vampire made vomited violets. Valerie voted against Vincent. As you go way out and you bite way down here while you're practicing, as you're making the V sound, you're overdoing it, you're exaggerating. Then when you come back and you actually practice and you speak English, you'll be able to come more easily, and you've overtrained yourself into biting your lip. You can come back in, and when you're speaking normally, you'll be biting here. So that's how you can apply the principle of exaggeration as a corrective to pronunciation difficulties. Let's move on to the sort of, to me, final and more important phase of language learning is when you start to read literature. Some people might just look at reading as a tool. These are people who say, I know reading is kind of good, but I also like watching movies and listening to music, and that's the way I'm going to get at the culture of a language. But if you want to get advanced and be able to have complicated conversations, you need to come to terms with the fact that in conversational language, we only use maybe 3,000 or 5,000 words. But if you want to sound intelligent and understand what people are saying when they make important points and get more sophisticated in your vocabulary, you need to use words that are like in the 5,000 to 10,000 range, or the 10,000 to 15,000 range of commonly used words. These are words that people who are fluent in a language know, but they don't use every day. They don't use them enough that you can pick them up in conversational language. But written language has a wider range of vocabulary, and so if you read extensively, then you will see these words that are not quite so commonly used. You'll see them often enough for them to stick and for them to learn. So reading might just be a tool for you to come advanced, but I would hope for many of you, my own approach to learning languages, for a lot of people, I would think that reading should be the goal, not just a tool, but a goal in itself, something that you say, that's why I'm learning the language. I want to know about the culture, and I know that language is the vehicle of the culture, and literature is the way that it's expressed. When people really write things, this is how I can really understand the culture of the language that I'm learning. And I think that reading has always been this way, but people who are alive now in our generation, we have an advantage that previous generations didn't. We can listen to audiobooks as well as reading text. I mean, you could always ask somebody to read, but you have to find somebody there. But now we can listen all the time, listen and read. The issue, though, is that just as most people, when they are asked to read aloud, tend to be inhibited in some way, most people, even when they try to read a text with some sort of flair, tend to have a hard time with this. Most people, when they read a text, even if they're offering the text, trying to do it as an audiobook, it's not just people who do it for free, but there are some, I want to say, bad professional narrators where you listen and it's just not very interesting and exciting to listen to. Many people, when they read a text, tend to read it in basically a flat, boring monotone. I have a book here. It is one of my favorite contemporary English novels, works of literature. It's Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. Won the Booker Prize twice, the Booker's Booker. And it's a really interesting, exciting story. But if I try to read part of the first paragraph in the way that most people tend to read in sort of a flat, boring monotone, it's going to sound more like this. I was born in the city of Bombay once upon a time. No, that won't do. There's no getting away from the date. I was born in Dr. Narlikar's nursing home on August 15th, 1947. And the time? The time matters too. Well then, at night. No, it's important to be more on the stroke of midnight, as a matter of fact. Clock hands joined palms in respectful greeting as I came. Oh, spell it out, spell it out. At the precise instant of India's arrival at independence, I tumbled forth into the world. There were gasps, and outside the window, fireworks and crowds. A few seconds later, my father broke his big toe, but his accident was a mere trifle when set beside what had befallen me in that benighted moment, because, thanks to the occult tyrannies of those blandly saluting clocks, I had been mysteriously handcuffed to history. So most people, if they pick up a book and try to read it, will read in somehow that sort of flat, boring monotone. What I aspire to myself when I read, what I do teach in my reading and discussion circles, try to encourage people, is to read with dramatic flair, to read to the point where you're going to say, hey, that sounds like an interesting story. I want to listen to that. I want to hear that. So an example of the way that this should be read is something more like this. I was born in the city of Bombay once upon a time. No, that won't do. There's no getting away from the date. I was born in Dr. Narlikar's nursing home on August 15th, 1947. And the time? The time matters too. Well then, at night. No, it's important to be more on the stroke of midnight, as a matter of fact. Clock hands joined palms in respectful greeting as I came. Oh, spell it out, spell it out. At the precise instant of India's arrival at independence, I tumbled forth into the world. There were gasps, and outside the window, fireworks and crowds. A few seconds later, my father broke his big toe, but his accident was a mere trifle when set beside what had befallen me in that benighted moment, because, thanks to the occult tyrannies of those blandly saluting clocks, I had been mysteriously handcuffed to history. Now, I hope you'll agree that that second reading is something that you would probably, ideally, want to continue listening to and reading, but the first one probably would put you off. So how can we go from that first one to the second one, and particularly in a foreign language, a different language? So it is possible. I would refer you back to, I made a video before Christmas, I think, of sitting in that chair and reading the first whole chapter, about 45 minutes, of Harry Potter translated into Latin. So reading that with trying to read a dramatic reading, dramatic flair, bringing it to life and doing that. It's certainly possible to do this in foreign languages as well as your own language. Obviously, you need to be familiar with the text, read it several times, but you also need to practice and use the same principle of exaggeration. So in order to do that, it's much easier to, before you move on to full paragraphs, full pages, to work with individual sentences. If you practice really overly dramatic delivery on individual sentences, then you get into the habit of it. You don't have to worry about connecting one thought to the next. You can just focus on the delivery, and then when you come to a text and you're actually trying to read it, then again, using the principle of exaggeration and retraction, you pull back and you just employ this where you need it to give emphasis rather than in every single sentence. So again, to practice with sentences, you need some sentences, and luckily, since I was working used Latin reference as a book that I read dramatically, Latin in particular has a long tradition of giving us long convoluted sentences as examples that you could possibly read them as being absurd or certainly as boring, but you could also take each one of them and make it hyper dramatic. And we're going to try that now and read these individual sentences aloud to do the practice of exaggeration, overdoing it, and then try to withdraw from this and have this be something that we can control, but we need to practice doing it in an overdramatic fashion. So again, this is easy to learn in a foreign language, as if you have sentences where you have both English And then Latin, it is easier, even though people read in a monotone in English, it's much easier to start in your own language, take an individual sentence, read it over dramatic fashion, and then carry that dramatic rendition into the foreign language. So I have some sentences of Latin to practice this with. And they're all in the second person, so I'm going to try to direct them right at you. However much thou and he affirm it, yet the attendant will deny that thou wast vigilant in the hall. Quamvis tu et ille affirmatis, tamen negabit famulus te in atrio vigilare. Didst thou not beat the servant with a big stick when he attacked thee by night with a sword? Non serum cum te noctu gladio pugnaret, magno baculo verberavisti? Why hast thou alternately denied and affirmed that thou hadst been beaten by a farmer with a stick? Quid alternis negavisti et affirmavisti te a colono baculo verberatum esse? There's a very great difference between me and thee, O barbarian, for thou hast falsely denied thy trust. Inter me, barbare, et te plurimum interest, tuum mandatum tuum falso negasti. Did you not affirm to the master that the boy was being beaten with a stick by a certain neighbor's comrade? Non et vos, domino, affirmavistis, puerum avicini quiustam socio baculo verberari? So, if you practice individual sentences in this overly dramatic fashion, you learn how to do it without having the need to connect them in a narrative, and then you can put them together, pull back, and have the ability, because you've trained yourself to do it in this hyperactive fashion, to do it in a more connected narrative fashion to take the tone of the story that you're actually telling. Especially with Latin, praeseritum lingua latina, hoc prodest quia difficile est lingua latina colloqui homines non desunt lingua latina loquentes, sed postquam id facile est pergere in mente mea lingua latina cogitare et lingua mea lingua latina fadere. So Latin is a hard language to talk because there's nobody to speak it with, but when you also, particularly with this exercise, you've gotten yourself so active, hyperactive thinking in Latin that you can, when you pull back, you can keep thinking and speaking in Latin. So this is particularly valuable for that. So these are three of the ways that you can use the principle of exaggeration, deliberately going beyond what you are trying to attain in practice of a foreign language, to then pull back and be able to do it, to hit your target. You can, when it comes to simply speaking aloud, if you're inhibited, okay, stand up straight, put yourself at attention and shout it out. And then when you snap back, rather than going from here to here, you will come from here to here, and you'll be where you need to be in a position to speak in a loud, clear voice. When you've learned phonetically speaking, this sound is difficult to make because my lips and teeth and tongue don't do this naturally. Push them in beyond the position that you want them to go to. Practice that in an exaggerated fashion, and then that abnormal position will become something in your range of possibilities. You'll be able to do it. And when it comes to reading dramatically with flair, that you want to do to bring a text to life beyond understanding a text, a connected text, and being able to bring it to life, you can practice with individual sentences, making them sort of as an actor would deliver or an actress would deliver her lines, getting into that habit, and then pulling back when you have deeper understanding of a text and being able to read that with flair. So I hope that these were ways that you can use the principle of exaggeration to help you become a more conscious and intentional language learner. Apply them across the board so that you can be more effective and more efficient in attaining your goals. I hope this was interesting and useful to you. And again, I'll talk to you again next week. As I mentioned in the preface, if you're still with me from that, I would very much appreciate your helping me spread the news, spread the word, spread the link where people can express interest in possibly attending the virtual academy that I am aiming to set up so that I can really do what I do best, only that, with people that are really up for it, and also continue having the time and the liberty to do things like make videos like this on a regular basis and share information with the world. So thank you very much for your assistance with that, and I'll